Hello and welcome. In this video, we are going to be drawing the head from a couple different angles and giving you some of the basics on how to do that. And it just bodes well for any artist to be able to construct a head and place all of the features relatively accurately and then reconfigure those features for the purposes of their character designs. So basically what you see me doing here is just drawing a simple circle and subdividing that circle with some guidelines as well as where the jawline is going to go. Now that's a fairly cartoony jawline, I would say. It's a fairly simplified version of what I usually do. But you can see that the top level subdivision of that T shape is the eyes. Next, the mid-level subdivision is the nose. Finally, the third subdivision being the mouth. So the other side is basically where I like to put the ear, and this is just a stark line to show you where the, kind of strongest plane change or strongest angle change on the face is past the cheekbone there. So I just kind of made it orange so it's less in your face. Anyway, once I have the guidelines in place for the head I want to draw, I'll show you how I actually draw a head later once you get comfortable with using guidelines a bunch. But for now, this is just a really decent simplified model. We like to place the features on it, so that's what I'm about to do here. Alright, so I've copied the head over and changed it to blue. Now we're going to draw some of the features of the skull in red. So these are the orbicular sockets. It sounds like a very fancy name, but all it means is the sockets in which the orbs that are the eyes will rest. So it's just a place for those spherical shapes that go inside the head are going to rest. Next, I'm drawing the nasal cavity, which is, the emblematic shape everybody knows from a skull. And it just helps to think about things like this in a couple different layers. For example, I'm drawing the cheekbones and the brow ridge as well, which is really nice to think about when you think about where you're placing the orbicular sockets. And those are going to rest between the brow ridge and the cheekbone. Obviously facial features vary and whatnot, but I'm just going in and drawing the actual bottom of the nose, so the nostril wings and the nose bridge, even though you can still quote-unquote see through it for the purposes of the demonstration. Next, we have the mouth. I usually start with 2 dots on the edge, a little bit past the nostril wings on each side, and then a lower lip and an upper lip. The upper lip is just sort of an M shape, typically, but obviously there's all sorts of upper lip shapes you can memorize and draw. Same with the lower M shape being more of a curved line or maybe a rounded trapezoid. It's pretty simplified as far as the style goes. And whenever I'm using this level of construction, I'm only using it as a means to learn how to draw something. Oftentimes my construction for actual drawings looks a lot or a little bit different, just because these are more for study and demonstration purposes so that you really understand it on a number of levels. As opposed to something you would work into a drawing necessarily. Although I've seen artists take full drawings from the constructive phase, like what you're seeing now, into the more finished or final phase. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not how I actually work, and I just want to be 100 with you in that capacity. So this is just how I like to show and how I learned how to do it. However, whenever I am thinking about actually drawing a head, this stuff is way in the background because I've drawn a lot of heads. So if I'm going into study mode, however, like learning new head angles or new facial features or whatever, I use this as a basis to learn it, because it doesn't have the most aesthetic results for me, but it does bode well for cementing whatever you're learning. So next, what you're seeing me go into here is a front view, similar approach, similar shapes. However, instead of having that initial downward T-shaped line, I'm just using the ears, which the bottom of the ears line up with the bottom of the nose. a super handy, useful proportional measurement for you. I'm then going in and drawing the orbicular sockets again, but again, more stylized. None of this is for super realistic heads, as you see in the thumbnail of the video. I could draw a really realistic head. It's just not something that I have a great deal of interest in doing at this point. Besides, most of the people who follow me for this sort of semi-realistic approach, which to me has a lot of flavor, a lot of style, a lot of fun. But it's still useful to understand the building blocks that you can use for a more realistic approach or what you could use for a more stylized approach. Essentially what I'm doing after just marking in the facial features is drawing over this particular drawing, much like you saw me do with the first one with the blue and the red. But this is going to be a little closer to how I work in terms of actually finishing a drawing that, to me, feels like I actually want to look at, as opposed to a drawing that I'm using to learn. It's nice to look at those drawings, and it's nice to learn from those drawings. And obviously, you can learn a lot from drawings that are not built to teach, but it's just good to see the approach and how it differs when you're creating something that is more for show rather than tell. So this is where I use those orbicular sockets to rough in some upper and lower eyelids, much like the corners of the mouth, which are, very interesting occlusions where there's a lot of muscles converging to. The corners of the eye can also be good spots for ambient occlusions, much like the nostrils are usually the darkest aspect of the nose when it comes to thinking in values or thinking in grayscale. That is something that I really like to do, thinking about where the darkest little occlusions are, because those make things seem so much more appealing, or they represent reality a little bit better than trying to memorize all the different shapes. And drawing from small darkened points or occlusions and extruding outward into lines is one of the most fundamental skills you can learn as an artist or as a draftsperson, because drawing from point to point is a lot like 3D modeling. But on that note, I really want to convey that as you're drawing these heads, everything that we construct on the picture plane is pretty similar. We're going from these very simple shapes to slightly more complex shapes arrayed in a proportional way. So this is sort of a longer face, kind of like the face I was drawing in the initial demo. But again, this is just how I would mark it off if I were to actually be sketching a face for my own purposes and not for just, oh, this is a demonstration, or this is how I would break it down even further. So this kind of has a semi-anime feel to it. It's a lot of where my drawing roots come from, so it's hard for me to root out. It's just an aesthetic that I prefer as well, so I tend to stick with it. We have stronger cheekbones here. It's sort of like male model features versus more normalized features or more average features. Again, not really a preference, just something that I practiced on a lot of models when I was drawing, not in real life, but from Pinterest. So a lot of my shapes and proportions and sensibilities as an artist tend to kind of gravitate in that direction at times. But obviously, if you're thinking very conscientiously about, okay, I really want to be aware of the proportions and I really want this guy to be very gruff looking or this girl to be very, a little more homely for the purposes of the character or something, then that's something you can do by altering the proportions, altering the shapes, altering the line qualities. There's lots of different tools you can learn, like the things that I teach in the beginner drawing course, which will allow you to understand how you can build up a character a little differently. I also talk way more about character design in my character drawing course. All this stuff has links in the description. So ears are something that I'm not going to drill too hard here. I go into them in the Simple Anatomy for Artists course. The Simple Anatomy for Artists course, excuse me. Yeah, what I mean is it's all this stuff I actually go way more into in that course as well, just because I find it helps to have more focused learning in a lot of instances. It's good to have all the beginning aspects down with the beginner drawing course, but then once you understand things like line quality and weight and general proportion and stuff. You apply that to things like anatomy or character design. So this is a head that I drew in order to showcase to you how I actually draw heads and not how I draw them just for demonstration purposes. And this time I'm just switching it up a little bit, drawing a girl head. And all this is real time, even though I'm talking or narrating it after the fact. This is all how I draw at actual speed. These were my warm-ups for the day, so they are not the strongest work that I would do for like a client or for my own personal projects, but they're reasonable for demo purposes. So here I am just drawing with the top of the skull in mind and then placing the eyes thereafter, kind of sketching in the nose. So I'm foregoing most of the guidelines at this point in favor of just configuring the shapes at a comparative proportion as well as comparative placement. So some of the Andrew Loomis books, which are fantastic for drawing at its basis, especially different types of figures and heads and whatnot, a lot of those talk about the 5 Ps and the 5 Cs, which I cover in the 16-week edition of the Beginner Drawing course. And proportion and placement are 2 of the Ps that you will learn that will help increase your artistic prowess, no pun intended, vastly. So here I am just sketching in the general character instead of all the guidelines. You see I've included hair on this model as well. I just wanted more of a tom girl. I'm sorry, not a tom girl, a tomboy rather. Even though at this point it looks like she's a bit androgynous, a lot of the differences between drawing a more feminine looking character and a more masculine looking character come down to proportions, the shape language that you choose, the eyes, and the nose and mouth. So more feminine traits tend to be stronger in the eyelash or makeup category. Women typically have softer jaw lines, and their skulls have a little more fat pads or pads of fat that obfuscate aspects of the skull, like the bonier parts that would be poking through and showing more detail in certain areas. And that's kind of stuff that gets into the more anatomical side of things, which isn't necessarily how deep I'm trying to go here. It's more about just generally how to draw a head and showing you a real-time process for that. Because I know when I was starting out, it was one of the things that meant the most to me, to be able to sketch in a head and feel like it didn't look super weird for some reason. A lot of the big mistakes that tend to occur when you're drawing a head are based on proportion and placement. But when you're first learning to draw, then it gets to be really frustrating if you don't understand some of the other basics that come along with drawing, different types of lines and line weights and shapes and drawing dimensionally. So if those things are already kind of scary to you, or you feel like those are what tend to hold you back, and you can kind of draw a decent head, you've got the proportions down, you got some of the shapes down, but for some reason your lines look kind of strange, or your process is off, or you just know that the actual acumen for different drawing skills, besides proportion and placement, just isn't coming together for you, then again, the beginner drawing course is what I would recommend. This is more for you have some basic drawing skills, but sometimes heads elude you, or you want some extra tips or some things to make it better. So you see what I'm doing here is drawing in some occlusions under the ear, under the neck, emphasizing the eyes, drawing in some freckles. So all these details help to really draw your attention to the face, and this is the girl that ends up in the thumbnail, so you already are a little familiar with her. I draw a lot of tomboy-esque girls just because it's a matter of personal preference. I don't like to draw super princessy, very overly beautiful girls, I guess, just because there's like a sweet spot between a girl with tons of femininity, but just enough of those like tough features that makes it very appealing for me to draw. So I've drawn a lot of girls like this. It's my comfort zone. As far as what I did to get to this point, it was basically just a matter of draw, erase, look at one shape, replicate it symmetrically because there's a symmetry to the face that we're trying to capture. And oftentimes, if you're finding that the face is too asymmetrical and you didn't design it that way, it is because your proportions or your placements or your shapes are off. So when you learn to diagnose the issues, you fix them much quicker. Oftentimes in the beginning, you will work for a long time and not see something. And you have to be willing to face reality in that fact, in the fact that it's difficult to draw something and really see it how you should see it, which is why I teach a lot of flipping the canvas. I teach a lot of rotating the canvas, even though I didn't do that in this particular demo. If you're working in a lot of tones, I suggest grayscaling it to find your value patterns and how you're massing values, all that good stuff. So being honest with yourself about when something doesn't look right will make it so that you can fix it. As far as our side demo here, our profile view, it's very similar to how I constructed everything else, and I will still go in and alter a lot of these shapes because he turns out a bit too much like a kid. Kids have features that are a little more round, a little more squashed down, whereas adult features in general tend to be more elongated because of the growth of all the different bones and muscles and hormones that communicate with the body and tell it to take on certain shapes as you age. So as you can see, he's very young looking, not a very strong jaw. The facial features are a little squashed down. The ear is very big by contrast. So yeah, it looks more like a kid. And I erased the ear several times just because I was never super stoked about the shape I got with it. But I kind of just leave it there after I get a reasonably good shape. But just to wrap this one up, I'm going to scale the face and add some hair, just so you can see that proportions will make the difference between, visual age as well. So here I am just lassoing the face, elongating it with the transformative bounding box in Clip Studio, and immediately he takes on, 5 to 10 years of age just by that. And then we'll just sketch in some hair and call this one good. So thanks for watching. If you want some courses that'll help you level up your drawing ability, you can check out thebeginnerdrawingcourse.com, all that good stuff in the description box. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel for more drawing videos. Hit the thumbs up button so that the algorithm gods will shine favorably upon me and my humble little drawing channel that I've been running for 7 years. No, I'm sorry, probably 8 now. At any rate, I appreciate the support. I wish you the best on your drawing journey, and happy drawing as well. Take care.